The small-town hospital in rural Ohio was quiet that evening. The emergency room, usually bustling with activity, had only a few patients waiting to be seen. Rachel Carter, a nurse who had worked there for nearly 10 years, was finishing up her shift. She liked working nights because it gave her time to think and reflect while doing her job. But tonight something unusual broke the calm. An orderly wheeled in a man who looked like he was in bad shape. His clothes were torn and dirty, and his face was pale, almost gray. Rachel noticed him immediately. There was something strange about him, something that made her pause. As she approached, she saw yellow stains on his black pants. They weren't ordinary stains. They seemed to glow faintly under the fluorescent lights of the ER. The man's name was Marcus Johnson. He groaned softly as the orderly helped him onto a stretcher. His eyes darted around the room, wide with fear, and his breathing was shallow and uneven. Rachel leaned closer to check on him. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked gently. Her voice was calm, but inside, she felt uneasy. Marcus turned his head toward her, his lips trembling as if trying to form words. Finally, he managed to whisper, "Help me, please." His voice was hoarse, barely audible. Rachel frowned. Something wasn't right here. She reached out to touch his arm, but he flinched violently, pulling away from her as though her hand burned him. Okay, Rachel said quickly, holding her hands up to show she meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you. Just try to stay calm." She glanced at the orderly, who shrugged and stepped back. This wasn't the first time they'd seen someone come in frightened or confused, but this felt different. For one thing, those yellow stains on his pants were unlike anything Rachel had ever seen before. She took a closer look. The stains weren't just glowing, they seemed alive. They shifted slightly, spreading across the fabric in tiny tendrils. It reminded her of how ink spreads when dropped into water, except this was happening on its own. Rachel blinked, wondering if she was imagining things. She leaned closer, squinting at the stains, when suddenly she heard a faint hissing sound. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it sent a shiver down her spine. "What's wrong with you?" Rachel murmured under her breath. She didn't expect an answer, but Marcus spoke again, his voice trembling. It's inside me," he whispered. His eyes were filled with terror now, and he clutched at his chest as if trying to hold himself together. "They told me it would stop, but it won't stop." Rachel straightened up, her heart pounding. Whatever this was, it wasn't normal. She needed answers, and fast. "Can you tell me what happened?" she asked, keeping her tone steady. "Where does it hurt?" Marcus shook his head weakly. "The factory," he muttered. "Outside town? I don't remember." His words trailed off, and his body went limp. For a moment, Rachel thought he might have passed out, but then she noticed his eyelids fluttering. He was still conscious, just too exhausted to speak anymore. Rachel turned to the orderly. "We need to get him stabilized," she said firmly. "And call security. Keep an eye on him. I don't want anyone else getting near him until we figure out what's going on." The orderly nodded and hurried off to fetch supplies. As Rachel worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play here. The glowing stains, the hissing noise, Marcus's cryptic warnings, it all pointed to something far beyond a typical medical emergency. She glanced around the ER. A few other patients sat in chairs, waiting patiently for treatment. None of them seemed to notice the tension building in the room. Good, Rachel thought. The last thing they needed was panic. Once Marcus was settled in a private examination area, Rachel began checking his vitals. His pulse was erratic, and his skin felt clammy to the touch. She rolled up his sleeve to insert an IV line, but what she saw made her freeze. Patches of his skin were discolored, almost like chemical burns. They weren't red or blistered, though. They had a sickly yellowish hue, matching the stains on his pants. Rachel swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. She attached the IV and adjusted the drip rate, then grabbed a clipboard to jot down notes. Before she could write anything, however, Marcus let out a low moan. His body twitched involuntarily, and his eyes snapped open. "No," he gasped. Don't let it take me. Take you where? Rachel asked sharply, leaning closer. Who are you talking about? But Marcus didn't respond. Instead, his entire body convulsed and he let out a scream so loud it echoed through the ER. Other patients turned to look, startled, and one of the receptionists rushed over to see what was happening. Rachel waved her away, signaling that she had everything under control even though she didn't. Stay with me, Marcus, Rachel urged, gripping his shoulder. You're safe here. We're going to help you. For a brief moment, Marcus seemed to calm down. His breathing slowed and his eyes locked onto hers. Call 911, he rasped. Tell them, it's not safe. Rachel hesitated. Why would he ask her to call 911 when he was already in a hospital? What did he mean by not safe? Before she could ask, his body went rigid and his eyes rolled back into his head. Alarmed, Rachel pressed the emergency button on the wall, summoning additional staff to assist. Within minutes, the room was crowded with doctors and nurses. Someone hooked Marcus up to a heart monitor, which beeped erratically. Another person prepared a sedative to calm him down. Through it all, Rachel stood back, watching silently. She knew they were doing everything they could to stabilize him, but deep down, she doubted conventional medicine would solve this problem. When things finally settled, Rachel slipped out of the room to make the call Marcus had requested. She dialed 911 and explained the situation as best she could without sounding hysterical. I don't know exactly what's wrong with him, she admitted, but there's something unnatural about it. You need to send someone who can handle this kind of thing. The operator promised to alert the appropriate authorities and assured Rachel that help was on the way. Hanging up, Rachel returned to Marcus's bedside. He was unconscious now, his chest rising and falling steadily. For the first time since he arrived, the room felt peaceful, but Rachel knew better than to trust appearances. Whatever was wrong. With Marcus, it wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. As she stared at the glowing stains on his pants, Rachel couldn't help but wonder, what had she gotten herself into? And more importantly, how much worse was this going to get? Detective Alan Brooks arrived at the hospital less than an hour after Rachel's call to 911. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude. His dark jacket was slightly wrinkled from the long day he'd already put in, but his eyes were alert as he stepped into the emergency room. The first thing he noticed was the tension in the air. Nurses and doctors moved quickly, their faces etched with worry. Something big was happening here, and Alan could feel it. Rachel Carter met him near the front desk. She looked tired but determined, her blonde hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. "Thank you for coming," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "This isn't like anything I've ever seen before." Alan nodded. "Tell me what happened." Rachel led him to a private corner of the ER, where they could talk without being overheard. As she recounted everything, from Marcus Johnson's arrival covered in glowing yellow stains to his cryptic warnings and sudden violent outbursts, Alan listened intently. He didn't interrupt, letting her finish her story before asking questions. When she mentioned the glowing stains on Marcus's pants and the strange hissing sound they made, Alan raised an eyebrow. "You're sure about that? The glowing part?" "I know how it sounds," Rachel admitted, crossing her arms. "But yes, I'm sure. And it wasn't just the stains. There's something off about him. His skin has these weird burn marks, and his body temperature keeps changing. One minute he's burning up, the next he's freezing cold." Alan frowned. "And he said something about a factory?" Rachel nodded. "He kept muttering about working at some abandoned factory outside town. He claimed he doesn't remember much after being exposed to whatever did this to him. But he also said things like, 'It's inside me and they told me it would stop.' It's like he's fighting against something or someone." Alan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Sounds like we need to check out this factory." "Do you know where it is?" "Not exactly," Rachel replied. "But I can ask him again if he's awake. Right now, though, he's sedated. The doctors had to give him something to calm him down after he started screaming." Alan glanced toward the examination room where Marcus lay unconscious. Let's see what else we can find out here first. Maybe there's something on his clothes or belongings that'll give us a clue. Together, they walked to the room where Marcus was being monitored. A nurse stood by his bedside adjusting the IV drip. Alan introduced himself and asked permission to examine Marcus's personal effects. The nurse handed over a plastic bag containing Marcus's wallet, keys, and phone. Inside the wallet, Alan found a faded ID card identifying Marcus as an employee of a company called Biocore Industries. The address listed on the card matched the location of several old industrial buildings on the outskirts of town. "This must be the factory he was talking about," Alan said, showing the card to Rachel. "We should go take a look." Rachel hesitated. "Do you think it's safe? If whatever happened to him came from there?" "We'll be careful," Alan assured her. "Besides, we can't just sit around waiting for answers. This could be bigger than we realize." With that decided, Rachel agreed to accompany Alan to the factory. They gathered some basic supplies from the hospital's storage room: flashlights, gloves, and protective masks left over from the pandemic. Neither of them knew what they might encounter, but they wanted to be prepared. The drive to the factory took about 20 minutes. The road leading to it was narrow and poorly maintained, lined with overgrown trees that cast long shadows in the dim light of the setting sun. When they finally arrived, the building loomed ahead of them, a hulking structure made of crumbling brick and rusted metal. Broken windows stared out like hollow eyes, and a chain-link fence surrounded the property, though parts of it had collapsed over time. "This place looks abandoned for years," Alan remarked as they parked the car. "Hard to believe anyone would still work here." Rachel nodded silently, gripping her flashlight tightly. Something about the factory gave her the creeps, even from the outside. As they approached the main entrance, Alan used his flashlight to scan the area. The ground was littered with debris, pieces of broken machinery, empty barrels, and scraps of paper fluttering in the breeze. He pushed open the heavy metal door, which creaked loudly on its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The floor was covered in dirt and grime, and the walls were streaked with blackened patches that looked like burn marks. Alan shone his light around the room, revealing rows of overturned tables and shattered equipment. In the center of the space stood several large vats, their contents long since evaporated, or so it seemed at first glance. Rachel gasped when she saw one of the vats more clearly. Its interior was coated with a faint yellow residue that glowed softly under the beam of her flashlight. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing. "It's the same stuff that was on Marcus's pants." Alan stepped closer, examining the vat carefully. "Whatever this is, it's not natural." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small evidence bag, scooping up a sample of the glowing substance. "We'll need to get this analyzed." As they explored further, they found more signs of recent activity. Scattered papers lay on a nearby desk, some of them marked with scientific diagrams and notes written in hurried handwriting. Rachel picked up one sheet and skimmed through it. Her eyes widened as she read aloud. "Experimental organism designed to enhance cellular regeneration. Potential applications include accelerated healing and increased physical endurance." Alan frowned. "Sounds promising, but also dangerous. What else does it say?" Rachel flipped to another page. "Here's a warning. Unstable compound. High risk of mutation and uncontrolled growth. Containment protocols mandatory." She paused, her voice dropping. "This doesn't sound like something any legitimate company would experiment with, not without serious oversight." Alan nodded grimly. "Whoever was running this operation wasn't playing by the rules. Let's keep looking. Maybe we'll find something that explains how Marcus got involved." They continued searching the factory, moving deeper into its shadowy corridors. Every step felt heavier, as if the weight of the building itself was pressing down on them. At one point, Rachel thought she heard a faint noise. A soft clicking sound, almost like insects skittering across the floor. She stopped abruptly, shining her flashlight into the darkness. "Did you hear that?" she asked nervously. Alan shook his head. Probably just rats. This place is falling apart. There's bound to be critters living here. But Rachel wasn't convinced. The sound had been too deliberate, too rhythmic to belong to animals. Still, she didn't argue. They pressed on, eventually finding a locked door at the end of a hallway. Alan tried the handle, then stepped back and kicked it open with a loud crash. Inside was a small office, its walls lined with filing cabinets and shelves stacked with folders. On the desk sat a laptop computer, its screen cracked but still functional. Alan powered it on while Rachel rifled through the files. Most of them contained technical jargon she didn't understand, but one document caught her attention. A memo addressed to all employees. To all staff, she read aloud. Recent developments in Project Genesis have exceeded expectations. However, unforeseen complications have arisen. Employees are advised to exercise extreme caution when handling specimen samples. Any exposure incidents must be reported immediately to Dr. Emily Grant. Dr. Emily Grant? Alan repeated, jotting down the name. That's new information. Could be worth tracking her down. Rachel nodded, continuing to read. Wait, there's more. Listen to this. In the event of contamination, subjects may experience rapid physiological changes. Symptoms include discoloration of skin, erratic temperature fluctuations, and increased aggression. Immediate quarantine is required. Her voice trembled as she lowered the paper. That describes Marcus perfectly. Whatever infected him, it's spreading. Alan sighed, rubbing his temples. We need to get this info to the authorities ASAP. This isn't just a local problem anymore. If this stuff gets loose, Rachel cut him off. We can't wait. We have to act now. If Marcus is contagious, and if others were exposed, we could be looking at a disaster. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The gravity of the situation hung between them like a storm cloud. Finally, Alan stood up, his jaw set with determination. All right. Let's grab everything we can carry and get back to the hospital. We'll figure out our next move from there. As they gathered documents and samples, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The factory seemed alive, somehow, watching them, waiting. Every creak and groan of the old building sent chills down her spine, but she forced herself to focus, knowing that every second counted. By the time they returned to the car, night had fallen completely. The drive back to the hospital was silent, both of them lost in thought. When they finally arrived, Rachel turned to Alan. What do we do now? Alan exhaled slowly. Now we prepare for the worst and hope we're wrong. Neither of them realized just how right they were. Back at the hospital, Rachel and Alan wasted no time sharing what they had discovered with the staff. The doctors listened carefully as Rachel described the glowing yellow substance in the factory vats and how it matched the stains on Marcus's pants. Alan added details about the documents they found, particularly the warnings about rapid physiological changes and the mention of Dr. Emily Grant. The mood in the room grew tense as everyone realized the gravity of the situation. We need to quarantine this entire area immediately, one of the senior doctors said, pacing back and forth. If this thing is contagious and based on what you've told us, it could spread quickly. Rachel nodded in agreement. Marcus isn't just sick, he's changing. Whatever that substance is, it's alive and it's inside him. The team sprang into action, sealing off the section of the hospital where Marcus was being kept. Security guards were posted at every entrance, and anyone who had been in contact with Marcus was instructed to stay put until further notice. Meanwhile, Alan contacted federal agencies hoping someone would take their findings seriously before the situation spiraled out of control. As preparations for containment continued, Marcus began showing alarming new symptoms. His skin, already discolored in patches, started to bubble and crack as if something beneath it was trying to break free. The yellow stains on his pants had spread upward, covering more of his body. His breathing became labored, and his eyes darted around the room as though he were seeing things no one else could. Rachel stayed by his side, monitoring his condition closely. At one point, Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but instead of words, a guttural growl escaped his lips. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. Rachel stepped back instinctively, her heart racing. Marcus? She called out cautiously. Can you hear me? For a moment, there was silence. Then Marcus's head snapped toward her, his eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural golden light. Leave us alone, a voice rasped. Not Marcus's voice, but something deeper, colder, and utterly alien. We will consume you all. Rachel froze, her blood running cold. She had suspected something otherworldly might be involved, but hearing those words come from Marcus's mouth confirmed her worst fears. Whatever was inside him wasn't just mutating his body, it was taking over his mind. Panicked, Rachel pressed the emergency button on the wall, summoning help. Within seconds, several nurses and doctors rushed into the room, along with 2 security guards. Together, they managed to restrain Marcus as he thrashed violently, his body contorting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. His fingers elongated slightly, curling into claw-like shapes, and his teeth seemed sharper than before. He's transforming, one of the doctors shouted. We need to sedate him now. Rachel grabbed a syringe filled with a powerful sedative and approached Marcus cautiously. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to focus. This wasn't just about saving Marcus anymore. It was about protecting everyone else in the hospital. As she injected the medication into his arm, Marcus let out a final ear-splitting scream that shook the entire room. Then, slowly, his body went limp and he fell unconscious. The relief in the room was palpable, but it didn't last long. Just as the medical team began checking Marcus's vitals, strange noises echoed through the hospital. Faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Some patients reported hearing them too, describing the voices as low, incomprehensible murmurs that made their skin crawl. Others claimed to see shadows moving in the corners of their vision, even when no one was there. Alan noticed the growing unease among the staff and decided to investigate. He walked down the hallway, flashlight in hand, scanning every corner for signs of movement. The whispers grew louder the farther he went, almost forming coherent sentences. Consume, spread, he thought he heard, though he couldn't be sure. When he reached the end of the corridor, he stopped abruptly. A puddle of water had formed near a broken pipe, its surface rippling despite the absence of wind. What caught his attention, however, was the faint yellow glow reflecting. Off the liquid, Rachel, Alan called out urgently. You need to see this. Rachel joined him moments later, her face pale as she stared at the puddle. That's the same stuff, she whispered. It's spreading. Before either of them could react, the lights flickered overhead, plunging the hallway into darkness for a brief moment. When they came back on, the glow in the puddle had intensified, pulsating rhythmically like a heartbeat. Both Rachel and Alan backed away slowly, exchanging worried glances. This can't be happening, Rachel muttered under her breath. How is it moving? How is it alive? I don't know, Alan admitted grimly, but we need to contain it before it infects anyone else. They returned to the quarantined area, where Marcus remained unconscious. The medical team worked tirelessly to stabilize him while keeping a safe distance. One nurse suggested transferring him to a specialized containment unit, but Rachel shook her head. We can't move him, she said firmly. Not until we understand what we're dealing with. If that thing inside him gets loose. No one finished her sentence. They all knew what was at stake. Hours passed, and Marcus's condition showed no signs of improvement. The yellow substance continued to spread across his body, forming intricate patterns that pulsed with light. His temperature fluctuated wildly, sometimes so hot that the air around him shimmered, other times so cold that frost formed on the nearby equipment. Each change brought new challenges, forcing the medical team to adapt quickly. During one particularly tense moment, Marcus regained partial consciousness. His eyes fluttered open, and for a split second they looked normal, human. He locked gazes with Rachel, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, he whispered hoarsely. I didn't mean for this to happen. It's not your fault, Rachel assured him, gripping his hand gently. Just hold on. We're going to figure this out. But Marcus shook his head weakly. It's too late for me. You have to stop it before it spreads. Rachel swallowed hard, fighting back tears. She wanted to tell him everything would be okay, but deep down she knew it wouldn't. Whatever was inside him was beyond their understanding, and the longer it remained unchecked, the greater the danger became. Later that night, federal agents finally arrived, led by a woman named Dr. Emily Grant, the same name mentioned in the factory documents. She introduced herself briskly, her sharp features and authoritative tone commanding immediate respect. After reviewing the evidence collected by Rachel and Alan, she confirmed their suspicions. The organism inside Marcus was extraterrestrial in origin, designed for biological enhancement but highly unstable. Worse still, it was capable of adapting to its environment, making eradication nearly impossible. There's only one way to stop it, Dr. Grant said gravely. We need to eliminate the host. Rachel felt a lump rise in her throat. You mean, kill him? Dr. Grant nodded. I'm afraid so. Every second we delay increases the risk of contamination. If this organism escapes, it could devastate entire populations. The weight of the decision crushed Rachel. She had sworn to save lives, not take them. But as she looked at Marcus lying motionless on the bed, she knew he wouldn't survive, regardless. The creature inside him was consuming him piece by piece, leaving nothing behind but a shell. After a long, agonizing silence, Rachel turned to Dr. Grant. Let me do it, she said quietly. He deserves compassion, not fear, Dr. Grant hesitated but eventually agreed. With trembling hands, Rachel prepared a lethal dose of medication. As she administered it, Marcus opened his eyes one last time. Thank you, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Then, with a final shuddering breath, he closed his eyes forever. The room fell silent as the medical team lowered their heads in mourning. But their grief was short-lived. Moments after Marcus's death, the yellow substance erupted violently, hissing and spitting like acid. The lights dimmed again, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. Rachel and Alan exchanged terrified glances as realization dawned. Killing Marcus hadn't stopped the organism. It had only unleashed it. Dr. Grant barked orders, instructing everyone to evacuate the hospital immediately. This facility is compromised, she declared. We need to destroy it before the organism spreads. As chaos erupted around them, Rachel and Alan stood together, watching helplessly as the alien presence surged forward, ready to claim its next victim. The hospital was in chaos. Alarms blared, echoing through the halls as staff and patients scrambled to evacuate. Dr. Emily Grant barked commands into a handheld radio, coordinating with federal agents who had set up a perimeter outside. The yellow substance that had erupted from Marcus's body was spreading rapidly, oozing across the floor and creeping up the walls like a living thing. Its glow pulsed erratically, casting eerie shadows that danced in every corner of the room. Rachel and Alan stood frozen for a moment, watching the horrifying scene unfold. The organism seemed alive, more than alive. It moved with purpose, as if searching for something, or someone. Rachel tightened her grip on the flashlight in her hand, her knuckles white. What do we do now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We follow orders, Alan replied firmly, though his face betrayed his fear. Everyone needs to get out of here. Now. They turned to leave, but as they reached the doorway, the lights flickered again, plunging the room into near darkness. When they came back on, the glowing mass had doubled in size, spilling into the hallway. The whispers returned, louder this time, overlapping in a cacophony of voices that made it impossible to think clearly. Some of the nurses screamed while others froze in terror, unable to move. Stay together, Alan shouted, raising his voice to be heard over the commotion. Don't let it separate us. Rachel nodded, forcing herself to focus. She knew panicking would only make things worse. Together, they ushered a group of frightened patients toward the nearest exit, their flashlights cutting through the dimly lit corridors. Behind them, the yellow substance continued its relentless advance, consuming everything it touched. Equipment sparked and short-circuited as it spread, and the air grew thick with the smell of burning plastic. As they neared the main lobby, Rachel noticed something strange. A young boy, no older than 10, was standing alone in the middle of the hallway, staring at the glowing mass with wide, unblinking eyes. He didn't seem afraid. In fact, he looked almost mesmerized. Rachel's heart sank. "Kid," she called out, rushing toward him. "You need to come with us. It's not safe here." The boy didn't respond. Instead, he took a step closer to the organism, reaching out his hand as if drawn to it. Before Rachel could grab him, the yellow substance surged forward, wrapping itself around his arm. The boy gasped, his expression shifting from curiosity to sheer terror in an instant. "No!" Rachel screamed, lunging forward. But before she could reach him, Alan grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "We can't help." "Him!" he yelled. "If we don't get out now, we're all dead." Tears streamed down Rachel's face as she watched the boy collapse to the ground, the glowing mass engulfing him completely. His cries faded quickly, replaced by an unsettling silence. For a brief moment, the organism paused, as if savoring its new victim, before resuming its relentless march forward. Shaken but determined, Rachel and Alan pushed onward, joining the stream of people fleeing the building. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension inside. Federal agents directed evacuees to designated safe zones, where medical teams waited to assess anyone who might have been exposed. Despite the organized effort, panic rippled through the crowd as stories of the glowing substance spread. Dr. Grant approached Rachel and Alan, her expression grim. "Did anyone else stay behind?" she demanded. Rachel shook her head. "I don't think so. Everyone was trying to get out." "Good," Dr. Grant said curtly. "Because we're about to destroy the hospital. That organism is too dangerous to contain. It has to be neutralized immediately." Alan frowned. "Destroy it? You mean blow it up?" "Something like that," Dr. Grant replied. "We've already evacuated a 2-mile radius around the facility. Once we're sure no one's left inside, we'll detonate the power core. It should incinerate everything within the building." Rachel felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Destroying the hospital meant destroying any chance of finding answers, of understanding what had happened to Marcus and the others. But deep down, she knew there was no other choice. If even a fragment of the organism survived, it could start spreading again, infecting more people and growing stronger. "You need to move farther back," Dr. Grant instructed. "Get to the command post half a mile away. We'll give you updates." From there, Rachel hesitated, glancing back at the hospital. Through the windows, she could see the yellow glow intensifying, pulsing like a heartbeat. It felt wrong to leave, to abandon the place where she'd worked for years, but staying would only put more lives at risk. With a heavy sigh, she followed Alan to the waiting vehicle. The drive to the command post was tense and silent. Neither Rachel nor Alan spoke, each lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Dr. Grant greeted them with a clipboard full of updates. "The demolition team is ready," she said. "They'll trigger the explosion in 15 minutes. Rachel stared at the distant silhouette of the hospital, her mind racing. Something about the situation gnawed at her, something she couldn't quite put into words. Finally, she turned to Dr. Grant. "What happens if the organism survives the blast? What if it mutates or adapts again?" Dr. Grant hesitated, then admitted, "That's a possibility we have to consider. But right now, containment is our priority. If we don't act decisively, it will keep spreading. This isn't just about one hospital anymore. It's about protecting everyone." Rachel nodded reluctantly, though doubt lingered in her mind. She glanced at Alan, who gave her a reassuring nod. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly. The command post buzzed with activity as agents prepared for the worst-case scenario. Then finally, the countdown began. Over a loudspeaker, a voice announced, "Detonation in 10 seconds. 9, 8. Rachel clenched her fists, bracing herself for the inevitable. The explosion would mark the end of the nightmare, or so they hoped. But as the final seconds passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. When the countdown reached 0, a deafening roar shattered the night. A massive fireball erupted from the hospital, lighting up the sky like daylight. The shockwave rattled the command post, sending loose objects tumbling to the ground. For a moment, everyone stood in stunned silence, watching the inferno consume the building. "It's done," Dr. Grant said finally, lowering her binoculars. The organism should be gone. But Rachel wasn't convinced. As the flames died down and smoke billowed into the air, she thought she saw something, a faint yellow glow flickering amidst the wreckage. At first, she dismissed it as a trick of the light, but then it pulsed rhythmically just like before. Her stomach churned. "It's still alive," she whispered, pointing toward the ruins. Dr. Grant raised her binoculars again, scanning the area carefully. After a long pause, she lowered them, her expression unreadable. "If it survived, we'll deal with it," she said firmly. "For now, we need to focus on securing the perimeter and running tests. There's no reason to jump to conclusions." Rachel wanted to argue, but exhaustion and fear kept her silent. She knew better than to trust appearances, not after everything they'd witnessed. Still, she forced herself to nod and step back, letting the experts take charge. Hours later, the sun began to rise, painting the horizon with streaks of orange and pink. The smoldering remains of the hospital cast long shadows across the ground, and the air smelled of ash and burnt metal. Teams clad in hazmat suits combed through the debris, collecting samples and searching for any sign of the organism. So far, nothing definitive had been found, but Rachel couldn't shake the image of that faint glow in the rubble. Alan joined her as she stood at the edge of the exclusion zone, staring at the ruins. "You okay?" he asked softly. Rachel shook her head. "No, I won't be okay until I know for sure that thing is gone. What if it spreads again? What if it finds another host?" Alan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We did everything we could. Sometimes that's all you can do." Rachel sighed, leaning into his support. "I hope you're right." As they turned to leave, a sudden gust of wind swept through the area, carrying with it the faint scent of sulfur. Rachel froze, her eyes darting toward the wreckage. Amidst the charred remains, she thought she saw movement, a shadow shifting where no shadow should be. Her breath caught in her throat, but when she blinked, it was gone. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Alan frowned, scanning the area. "See what?" Rachel hesitated, unsure whether to say anything. Maybe it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. Or maybe the organism wasn't done yet. Either way, one thing was certain. The fight wasn't over, and neither was the fear. The days that followed the destruction of the hospital were a blur of activity and tension. Rachel and Alan spent most of their time at the command post, working alongside federal agents and scientists to assess the aftermath. The smoldering ruins of the hospital had been cordoned off, and hazmat teams scoured every inch of the debris for any trace of the organism. Despite their efforts, no concrete evidence emerged to confirm whether the alien presence had truly been eradicated, or, if fragments of it still lingered. Rachel found herself unable to rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of Marcus's transformation, the glowing yellow substance spreading like wildfire, and the faint pulse of light she thought she'd glimpsed in the wreckage. She tried convincing herself it was exhaustion playing tricks on her mind, but deep down she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something had survived. Dr. Emily Grant remained calm and professional, leading the investigation with precision. She organized daily briefings to update everyone on the progress, though the news was often frustratingly inconclusive. "We've collected samples from the site," she announced during one meeting, holding up a sealed container filled with ash and debris. "Initial tests show no signs of biological activity. However, we're running additional scans to rule out microscopic traces." Rachel listened intently, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "What about the glow I saw?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease bubbling inside her. "I'm telling you, there was movement in the rubble after the explosion, Dr. Grant regarded her coolly. "Movement can be caused by many things," Shifting debris, heat waves, even wind patterns. Without definitive proof, we can't jump to conclusions. But what if I'm right? Rachel pressed. What if part of that organism is still alive? We can't just ignore it. We aren't ignoring anything, Dr. Grant replied firmly. Every possibility is being explored. But until we have evidence, speculating won't help us. Alan placed a reassuring hand on Rachel's shoulder, sensing her frustration. He knew how hard it was for her to let go of what she'd seen or thought she'd seen, but they couldn't act without facts. For now, all they could do was wait. Meanwhile, life in the small town began to return to some semblance of normalcy. Residents who had been evacuated were allowed to go home, though rumors spread quickly about what had happened at the hospital. Some claimed it was a chemical spill, while others whispered about government experiments gone wrong. No one mentioned aliens or extraterrestrial organisms. It sounded too far-fetched, even for those who had witnessed the chaos firsthand. Rachel struggled to adjust. Her apartment felt empty and unfamiliar, as if the weight of everything she'd experienced had changed her relationship with the space. She spent hours writing detailed reports about Marcus's condition, the factory, and the events leading up to the explosion. She sent copies to local authorities, federal agencies, and anyone else she thought might take her warnings seriously. Writing it all down helped her process what had happened, but it didn't ease the gnawing sense of dread in her gut. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table reviewing the documents she'd gathered from the factory, her phone buzzed. It was Alan. "Hey," he said when she answered. "How are you holding up?" "Not great," Rachel admitted. "I keep thinking about Marcus, about the boy, about everything." "I know," Alan said softly. "It's not easy, but you did the right thing. You saved lives." Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples. "Did I? What if this isn't over? What if it spreads again?" "We'll stop it," Alan promised. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." His words brought a small measure of comfort, but Rachel couldn't silence the doubts swirling in her mind. She thanked him and hung up, returning to the papers spread across her table. As she flipped through them, one document caught her eye, a memo addressed to Biocore Industries employees. It mentioned a secondary facility located in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Her heart skipped a beat. Could the organism have come from there instead of, or in addition to, the factory? If so, it meant the threat might not be contained to the hospital ruins. Grabbing her coat, Rachel headed outside and drove to the address listed on the memo. The warehouse was even more decrepit than the factory, its windows boarded up and its roof sagging under years of neglect. Rachel parked her car a safe distance away and approached cautiously, flashlight in hand. The air smelled musty, and the ground was littered with broken glass and rusted metal. She pushed open the heavy door, which groaned loudly on its hinges. Inside, the space was vast and cavernous, filled with old machinery and stacks of crates covered in dust. Rachel moved slowly, her footsteps echoing in the silence. At first, everything seemed undisturbed, too quiet, almost unnaturally so. But as she ventured deeper, she noticed something strange. Patches of yellow residue clinging to the walls and floor. They weren't glowing as brightly as before, but they were unmistakable. Rachel's breath hitched as she realized the implications. This wasn't just leftover contamination, it was active. Tiny tendrils of the substance crept outward, spreading slowly but steadily. She backed away instinctively, her flashlight beam trembling as she scanned the area. Then, she heard it. A faint hissing sound, almost identical to the one she'd heard in the hospital. Panic surged through her veins, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed proof, something tangible to show the authorities. Pulling a plastic evidence bag from her pocket, she scooped up a sample of the residue. As she sealed the bag, a sudden noise behind her made her spin around. A shadow darted past the edge of her flashlight beam, moving too fast for her to identify. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice shaking. There was no response. Only the sound of skittering footsteps fading into the darkness. Heart pounding, Rachel turned and ran, clutching the sample tightly. She didn't stop until she reached her car, slamming the door shut behind her. Back at the command post, Rachel burst into the main tent where Dr. Grant and her team were analyzing data. "You need to see this," she said breathlessly, holding up the evidence bag. "There's another location, an old warehouse. The organism is still active." Dr. Grant took the bag, examining it closely. Her expression darkened as she confirmed Rachel's suspicions. "This changes everything," she muttered. "If it's reproducing elsewhere, we may already be too late." Within hours, a team was dispatched to investigate the warehouse. Armed with advanced equipment designed to detect biological anomalies, they swept the area thoroughly. What they found chilled them to the bone. Clusters of the organism embedded in the walls, feeding off the decaying materials around them. It wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. "This thing doesn't need hosts," one of the scientists explained grimly. "It adapts to whatever environment it finds itself in. Given enough time, it could infiltrate entire ecosystems." Rachel listened in horror, realizing the true scope of the danger. Destroying the hospital hadn't stopped the organism. It had merely slowed it down. Now, it was spreading again, growing stronger with each passing day. As the team worked to contain the new outbreak, Rachel and Alan stood side by side, watching the operation unfold. "Do you think we can stop it?" Rachel asked quietly. "I don't know," Alan admitted. "But we have to try. If we don't, no one will." Rachel nodded, steeling herself for whatever came next. She had faced the unknown once before, and, though it had cost her dearly, she refused to give up. The fight wasn't over, not yet, and somewhere in the shadows, the organism pulsed faintly, waiting. The days that followed the discovery at the warehouse were a race against time. Hazmat teams worked around the clock, using specialized chemicals to neutralize the organism in its new hiding place. The glowing yellow substance resisted every attempt to destroy it completely, adapting and regenerating faster than anyone anticipated. Each setback only deepened the sense of urgency among the scientists and federal agents overseeing the operation. Rachel and Alan stayed close to the action, determined to see the fight through to the end. They attended daily briefings, reviewed test results, and helped coordinate efforts between the medical staff and the cleanup crew. Despite their exhaustion, neither of them considered stepping back. This wasn't just a job anymore, it was personal. Dr. Emily Grant led the charge with unwavering focus, her sharp eyes scanning reports and data for any clue that might give them an edge. "We're dealing with something far more advanced than anything we've encountered before," she told the team during one meeting. "Its ability to adapt means traditional methods won't work. We need to find its weakness if it has one." Rachel listened intently, her mind racing. She thought back to Marcus's final moments, when he had begged her to stop the organism before it spread. His words echoed in her head. "It's inside me. They told me it would stop." Could there be something about its origin, or its creators, that held the key to defeating it? That night, Rachel returned to her apartment and sifted through the documents she'd collected from the factory and warehouse. She pored over diagrams, memos, and handwritten notes, searching for anything she might have missed. Her eyes landed on a name mentioned repeatedly in the files: Dr. Samuel Klein, the lead researcher behind Project Genesis. According to the documents, he had disappeared shortly after the experiments were shut down. Rachel grabbed her phone and called Alan. "What if the person who created this thing is still out there?" she asked. "If anyone knows how to stop it, it's him." Alan hesitated. "You think he's alive?" "I don't know," Rachel admitted. "But it's worth checking. If we can track him down, maybe he can help us." They brought the idea to Dr. Grant, who agreed it was their best shot. With access to federal resources, they launched a search for Dr. Klein. It took 2 days to locate him, a frail, elderly man living under an assumed name in a remote cabin near the Canadian border. When agents arrived to question him, he initially refused to cooperate, claiming he wanted no part of what he called a disaster waiting to happen. But when they explained the stakes, his resolve crumbled. They never should have tampered with it. Dr. Klein said bitterly as he sat across from Rachel and Alan in a secure interrogation room. Project Genesis was supposed to revolutionize medicine, accelerate healing, cure diseases, but it was too unstable. The organism doesn't just heal, it consumes. Once it takes hold, there's no stopping it. Then why didn't you destroy it? Rachel demanded, anger creeping into her voice. Why leave it lying around in some abandoned factory? Klein sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. I tried. Believe me, I did. But my superiors wouldn't let me. They saw potential, profit where I saw danger. By the time I realized how far they were willing to go, it was too late. I destroyed what I could and fled. So you left it for someone else to deal with? Alan pressed. I didn't have a choice, Klein snapped, his voice cracking with emotion. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted innocent people to suffer because of my mistakes? Rachel softened slightly, seeing the guilt etched into his face.
Is there anything you can tell us that might help us stop it now? She asked gently. Klein hesitated, then nodded. There's a compound, something I developed during the early stages of testing. It suppresses the organism's ability
to replicate. But it's not permanent. It buys time, nothing more. Where is it? Alan asked urgently. In storage at Biocore headquarters, Klein replied. If it hasn't been moved or destroyed, it should still be there. Without wasting a moment, Rachel and Alan relayed the information to Dr. Grant, who authorized a raid on the Biocore facility. The building was heavily guarded, but federal agents managed to breach it undetected. Inside, they found crates filled with vials of the suppressant compound, along with detailed instructions for its use. Armed with the new weapon, the team returned to the warehouse, where the organism continued to grow unchecked. Hazmat teams sprayed the compound liberally over the affected areas, watching anxiously as the glowing substance began to dim and recede. For the first time since the ordeal began, there was hope. But the victory was short-lived. As the organism weakened, it reacted violently, releasing toxic fumes that forced everyone to retreat. The air grew thick with acrid smoke, and alarms blared as sensors detected hazardous levels of contamination. Dr. Grant ordered an immediate evacuation, warning that the structure itself was compromised. Rachel and Alan stood outside the warehouse, watching as flames erupted within the building. The compound had slowed the organism, but destroying it required extreme measures. Just like the hospital, the warehouse had to be incinerated to ensure nothing survived. This isn't going to end, is it? Rachel whispered, her voice heavy with despair. Even if we burn it all, how do we know it won't come back? We'll keep fighting, Alan said firmly, though his own doubts lingered. And we'll learn from this. Next time we'll be ready. When the fire finally died down, leaving only charred remains behind, hazmat teams moved in to collect samples. To everyone's relief, no traces of the organism were detected. It seemed, for now, the threat had been neutralized. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief, grateful to put the nightmare behind them. Rachel wrote a comprehensive report detailing everything she had witnessed, sending copies to scientific journals, government agencies, and media outlets. She knew the world needed to know what had happened, not just to warn others, but to hold those responsible accountable. One evening, as Rachel walked along the quiet streets of her neighborhood, she noticed a puddle reflecting the glow of a nearby street lamp. For a split second she froze, her heart pounding as memories flooded back. Then she shook her head, reminding herself that paranoia wouldn't help anyone. Still, when she stepped closer to examine the puddle, her breath caught in her throat. At the bottom, faint and barely visible, was a pulsating yellow glow. Rachel stared at it, torn between disbelief and dread. Was it real? Or was her mind playing tricks on her again? Before she could decide, the glow faded, leaving nothing but murky water behind. She backed away slowly, her thoughts racing. Had the organism truly been eradicated, or had fragments of it escaped unnoticed? Either way, one thing was certain. The fight wasn't over. As she turned and walked home, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, somehow, the organism was waiting to rise again.